destroyed city and prepare yourself for the Man of Black.
Wasn't fucking there!
It's false. No way. Not this time. Pure fiction. It's false. It's a total fabrication. We created it. You're wrong. Not this time. It never happened.
Ed, could you just give us your initial reaction to the findings of the Pegasus project?
This is everything. This is an industry that should not exist. We're seeing what the NSO group, which is sort of one of the most famous of these guys, is up to. But the NSO group is only one company of many. And if one company smells this bad, what's happening with all the others? I mean, when I look at this, what the Pegasus project has revealed is a sector where their only product are infection vectors, right? They don't, they're not security products. They're not providing any kind of protection, any kind of prophylactic. They don't make vaccines. The only thing they sell is the virus. And I think saying that they only sell this to government doesn't make that better.
There's been a number of surveillance leaks and disclosures over the years. No doubt the most significant was yours. How do you think this one compares?
This is certainly the most interesting. And these are major newspapers, major institutions that we rely on. This is peeling back a curtain that we have never seen done this level.
In the past, you've called smartphones a spy in your pocket. Do you think this confirms that?
I think it's actually worse. When I said they're a spy in your pocket, it's the potential, it's the capability, it's the fact that these things are talking to the mobile phone network and tracking the locations. You've got Facebook spying on you. But these are largely commercial programs for commercial purposes. What we see now are people creating an industry to keep those phones and go beyond the level of spying that already previously existed. And now they're actually taking control of that phone fully and turning it against the people who bought and paid for it, but no longer truly own it. And the thing is, these phones are clones. When we're talking about something like an iPhone, they're all running the same software around the world. So if they find a way to hack one iPhone, they've found a way to hack all of them. And they are doing that, and they are selling that. That is a known, intentional, willful attack on critical infrastructure that every one of us rely on. It doesn't matter what flag you live under, it doesn't matter what language you speak. We all have skin in this game.
What needs to happen now?
We have to stop this. Inaction is no longer enough. If you don't do anything to stop the sale of this technology, it's not just going to be 50,000 it's going to be 50 million. It's going to be much more than any of us expect. The way we do that is to train this technology. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what you're doing. Your position isn't going to protect you. If you're a minister, prime minister, guess what? You're a minister. You're a Supreme Court justice. You're a minister. If you're an ordinary person, guess what? You're on the risk too. All you have to do is come to the attention of somebody with money with every one of these companies for the tools to break into your phone.
For people reading these stories and watching this interview, the answer to the question of what can they do personally to protect themselves and their own phone, it seems like it's nothing.
The solution here for ordinary people is to work collectively. This is not a problem that we want to try and solve individually because it's you versus $1 billion company. What can you do to protect yourself from the group? A little, but you can't solve the problem. It's the same when we're talking about the NSO group. You can make yourself safer, right? But we will not be safe until we
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Media organizations that investigated the Israeli cyber surveillance company NSO.
Turning out with the biggest spying scandal in cyber history. We have been
a list of more than 50,000 phone numbers. This includes activists, journalists.
having hacked using this Pegasus spyware. Should we be afraid? Nobody is safe at this time.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post, where we don't cover the news, we cover the way the news is covered. Here are the media stories we're examining this week. User warning for activists, dissidents, and journalists the world over. Your mobile phones may have been compromised by spyware that one company is selling and authoritarian governments are buying. A match made in space. Rockets, their billionaire payloads.
You sit in the Jeff Bezos chair.
The news outlets that cannot get enough of the story. There is a crucial election coming up in Germany, and the most widely read newspaper is building up its coverage, trying to maintain its influence. And pranking anti-lockdown protesters in the UK.
Can you feel the hand of the New World Order upon us?
With a fake news report and trolling the tabloids driving the story. It has been a week now since a global consortium of media outlets blew the lid off a huge surveillance scandal, revealing how the hacking tool Pegasus has been used by governments around the world to spy on dissidents and journalists via their mobile phones. This is not the first time the spyware has made headlines. Pegasus is the brainchild of an Israeli tech company, NSO. It came up in the investigation into the murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. What is different this time around is the scale of the story. The leak of 50,000 phone numbers belonging to some big-name politicians, corporate figures, and nearly 200 journalists reportedly identified as targets of NSO's clients. The evidence would suggest that the company has been all too willing to sell its spyware to repressive governments known to crush dissent. Ultimately, this is a story about privacy, the vulnerabilities of modern technology, and the lack of regulation of a surveillance industry that's on the rise. Our starting point this week is the malware that's infecting people's phones.
Pegasus is a weapon, and once it's inside your phone, they get everything. They got your voice, they activate the camera, they can read your encrypted message. So it's like a person that is over your shoulder and who is reading what you're reading, who is watching what you are watching. So it's like a spy in your pocket.
A global journalistic consortium, more than 80 reporters, 17 different news outlets in 10 countries, poring over 50,000 phone numbers to confirm what had long been suspected, that Pegasus, a spyware tool developed in Israel, is being used by multiple governments to target the phones of opposition figures, activists, and journalists like Bradley Hope and Rohini Singh.
I'm an investigative reporter. I write on very powerful people. I've done stories on people associated with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. I've written on Amit Shah, the Minister of India, who's the second most powerful person in this country. So obviously the government would not want me to do this story. So it makes me angry and I feel very, very violent.
This whole investigation and revelations of these newspapers, what it shows is that this is something that's widespread. We've seen in the past lots of individual cases of a journalist or a dissident, evidence that this software has been used. But what's so powerful about this reporting is that we're seeing massive abuse of this kind of technology that was meant to be used for national security.
Pegasus was created by an Israeli tech firm, NSO, and first surfaced in news stories in 2016. Then came occasional reports of rights activists and journalists in countries like the United Arab Emirates, Morocco, and Mexico having their phones infiltrated, suggesting the spyware was growing popular with more and more governments. The consortium proved that. Its work began when a list of 50,000 phone numbers identified for targeting by Pegasus users was leaked to a Paris-based NGO, Forbidden Stories.
Your phone was compromised.
Working along with Amnesty International's Security Lab, the NGO was able to identify some of the targets, including political leaders and opposition figures, as well as dozens of journalists.
It's pretty much automatic.
The first step of the investigation was to identify the name, who was behind the phone numbers.
Your messages, your images, just everything that's happened on your phone.
We were able to identify some journalists, human rights defenders, and we told them we have reasons to believe that you have been under surveillance, and would it be possible to check your phone? And this is where the Amnesty International Security Lab did a fantastic job, because they were able to set up a process to know if your phone is infected by the Pegasus software. And we found traces of infection inside the phones of many people, and those traces are linked to the NSO software Pegasus.
governments that have done business with NSO have a lot to answer for, but most have either denied buying the spyware or are staying silent. Like Saudi Arabia, which relied on Pegasus to infect the phones of people close to Jamal Khashoggi before the journalist was killed by Saudi operatives. India, where Prime Minister Modi's chief political rival, Rahul Gandhi, has been targeted, as have reporters, including from the news site The Wire. Then there's Mexico. Its former government used the spyware on its critics, including dozens of opposition politicians, some of whom are now in power. That started in 2017, the same year that a journalist, Cecilio Pineda, was murdered. His phone had been hacked.
We found the phone numbers of some Mexican journalists, and one of them was Cecilio Pineda. Only 2 months after we see the numbers of Cecilio Pineda in the list, Cecilio was killed. We have a lot of cases of journalists, even in Hungary, with our colleagues of Direct 36, or in India, the team of the Wire, who were investigating people very close to Modi.
The numbers are huge. Edward Snowden says that the 50,000 numbers that we see, if this is not checked, it will turn into 50 million in a very short time. So the database is growing. NSO is very clear that they only sell to vetted governments. And the Indian government so far has not clarified whether it has bought a Pegasus spyware. Tell us clearly, yes or no, did you buy Pegasus software from NSO? And they haven't come up with a clear explanation.
NSO has been critical of the consortium's reporting, calling aspects of it erroneous and false. But the company doesn't help its case. It says that its clients are contractually compelled to only use Pegasus to fight serious crime and terrorism, but then admits, we do not operate the system, nor do we have access to the data of our customers. And it won't even confirm or deny which governments it sells Pegasus to. Bombarded with questions from journalists all week, it sent us an email saying enough is enough, that it will no longer be responding to media inquiries and will not play along with this vicious and slanderous campaign.
They have no credibility because ultimately, to say a country is contractually bound not to abuse the system, are you now going to shut down like all these countries that we now know are abusing their contracts?
Yes, sir. It's a leading technology developer.
It would really harm their business because the countries that really need it are the countries most likely to abuse the software. So they have a lot of explaining to do.
NSO Group has given us no reason to trust them. We have caught them in lies over and over again. And last of all, governments describe opposition to them as serious crime and terrorism all the time. One of the hallmarks of authoritarian government is that to oppose that government is to commit a serious crime or to commit terrorism. So saying your software is only going to be used to fight terrorism or serious crime is absolutely not a bulwark against abuse.
Remember when one surefire way to prevent malware from infecting your device was to spot that dodgy-looking link sent to you and deleting it? Those days are gone. Pegasus is click-free spyware. All it needs is your mobile number, and you can be compromised. That is why investigative reporters, meeting with sources they do not want revealed, endangered, now say they will leave their phones at home.
The journalists who have been targeted by Pegasus face a real dilemma. Because they know that they're being actively targeted by a government, it becomes much more difficult for them to do their journalism and to find people who will trust them and communicate with them over the phone. So I think we're going to be looking at a lot more face-to-face meetings, a lot more sort of alternative methods of communication.
The sources know that they could get into trouble talking to us. That's a risk that they know that they're taking. I'm not going to be taking my phone with me when I go to these sources of very sensitive stories. It's like carrying a live CCTV with you wherever you go.
30 years into the digital age, more than 10 years after citizen journalism changed the way stories are told, reporters and their sources are seeing their mobile phones turned against them. Low-tech journalism is making a comeback, and companies like NSO and the governments using Pegasus against their own people are the ones to blame. American media outlets have been feasting on a story that's more of a spectacle, the billionaire space race. Meenakshi Ravi has been examining the coverage. Meena, there's a reason that American journalists call the hot months of summer the silly season, isn't there?
Absolutely. And this story fits the bill. We have three billionaires, British businessman Richard Branson, the founder of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, and tech entrepreneur Elon Musk. All three of them racing to reach the fringes of space in rockets developed by their teams. Branson won that contest a couple of weeks ago, but this past week it was Jeff Bezos' turn. This is the world's richest man, and most of his wealth comes from the mega corporation that he founded, Amazon. The corporation avoids tax around the world, is being criticized criticized for not paying blue-collar workers a living wage and not even giving them enough time for bathroom breaks. But put Bezos in a rocket ship, and US media outlets tend to lose their faculties. This interview that he did with CBS's morning news show is just one example.
So what's next? Because Jeff, you don't have to do anything, but you choose to do one of the hardest things.
Well, you do the things that you're passionate about.
Bezos owns a newspaper, The Washington Post. One of its op-eds described the billionaire space flights as important milestones. Bear in mind that human space travel began 60 years ago, while another op-ed told readers that this benefits the rest of us.
Let's compare and contrast the coverage of that against the coverage of another story also about the planet that is far more consequential.
And what we see there, Richard, is indefensible. According to Media Matters for America, a US-based nonprofit, the morning news show spent 212 minutes covering Jeff Bezos' space launch in one day. That's almost as much time as they spent covering the global climate crisis all of last year. One example of the way in which the networks handle these stories comes in the case of climate scientist Katharine Hayhoe. She was due to appear on CNN to discuss the record-breaking heat wave across Western North America, but her segment was dropped in order to make room for more coverage on Jeff Bezos' space launch.
Okay, thanks, man. When Germans go to the polls in September, they will be taking part in a watershed election, voting in a new chancellor after 16 years of Angela Merkel. A major media player in that process will be Bild, a tabloid paper that for nearly 70 years has been a shrill and provocative constant in the German political landscape. Love it or hate it, few Germans are ambivalent about Bild, the influence it wields. It remains the go-to site for clickbait headlines and political scoops for readers from all walks of life. But like most legacy media outlets, Bild is struggling to maintain its relevance. It's dealing with declining circulation, some internal upheaval, and has invested heavily in online streaming with new TV network. The Listening Post's local look now on Bild, and the efforts underway to preserve the paper's place at the heart of German politics.
You could say Julian Reichelt was born for the job, a child of Bild. His parents met at the paper. He says that by age 13, his ambition was to become its editor-in-chief.
Bild has been a companion for people over almost 70 years, describing their mood, catching what they care about, catching what they feel about strongly, describing that in words people understand, and giving people a unique voice, especially people that feel that they're not being heard. But there is no question that this is also a very controversial brand, that there are people who strongly disagree with our editorial positions, who don't like the overall genre of tabloid journalism, who quite frankly despise Bild.
Ich muss sagen, dass ich Bild nicht mehr lese.
I don't read Bild anymore, I simply refuse to. Bild aims to emotionalize, to sensationalize, and from time to demonize. Actual news, information that is useful and relevant, appears in the margins. But the rest is, how do I say it, meaningless. Stories about affairs and sex and crime and so on. My time is too precious for this.
Ist mir die Zeit zu schade.
The problem is, for the more than half of Germany that doesn't like it, Bild is everywhere. Kiosks, train stations, laundrettes, anywhere Germans spend their time. With a daily circulation of 1.2 million and roughly 25 million online viewers a month, Bild is more widely read than papers like FAZ, Süddeutsche and Welt combined. It's a tabloid, full of gossip and gore, but it does politics too. And its ability not just to report on events, but to influence them, is why it's read by both builders on their break and government ministers in Berlin.
Bild hat aus meiner Sicht eine gewisse politische...
Bild has a certain political agenda that it wants to achieve. And currently, for obvious reasons, the pandemic is a big topic. Bild have played a remarkably significant role here because they've tried, once again, to influence politics with very clear messaging. They're not always successful, but every now and then, Bild do manage to shape the national discourse with reporting that suits their own agenda.
Dass in eine bestimmte Richtung gelenkt wird.
That, for the most part, is a centre-right populist agenda. Take, for example, its stream of anti-immigrant coverage over the last few years. Its narrative around Greeks out to steal German euros in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. Or its depiction of German welfare recipients as lazy and parasitic.
And the paper has the kind of political clout that cannot be ignored. Take it from 3 former chancellors of Germany. In 1999, Gerhard Schröder announced during his first term, "All I need to govern is Bild on Sunday and the TV." He then hired a Bild editor as his press secretary. Schröder's predecessor, Helmut Kohl, and another former Bild editor were best men at each other's weddings. And Chancellor Helmut Schmidt once said that starting an argument with Bild would be an act of political suicide. That's how much power the paper has wielded over German politics.
Matthias Döpfner als Springer Vorstandsvorsitzender.
Matthias Döpfner, the CEO of Axel Springer, once said that whoever goes up in an elevator with Bild needs to be prepared to go down with them as well. A good example of this is Christian Wolff. During his time as a regional politician, he had a very close relationship with Bild, offering up exclusive stories about the political elite in exchange for positive coverage. However, when he became the federal president, he made it very clear to the editor of the Times that he no longer appreciated what Bild was doing. And that's when Bild started a kind of witch hunt against him, and their reporting would turn even the slightest thing into a huge scandal.
Diesen Skandal aufgebauscht wurde.
Das Erzeugen einer Persönlichkeit durch eine Boulevardzeitung.
A tabloid doesn't just grant someone celebrity status for no reason. It's not in Bild's interest to just help a politician gain popularity. They are in it for their circulation. The moment it became more attractive to scandalize Wolff, that's what happened, and his reputation was permanently destroyed. Bild is an incredibly powerful organization, and the fear of being targeted by Bild still influences the actions of almost every politician in the land.
In der bundespolitischen Landschaft jedenfalls.
The king-making power of Bild has always been a myth, and it would be foolish to follow that myth. A couple of years ago, Bild was too much part of that whole favor game between journalists and politicians that led to misreading our respective societies, and we've changed that.
Sometimes reporters go undercover to get the real story. That's what Günter Wallraff did in 1977. Only he was pretending to work as a Bild reporter in order to reveal the way the paper operated. His expose, Der Aufmacher, the lead, uncovered a number of dubious journalistic practices. The picture he painted was not pretty.
Das war damals noch ein total autoritärer Stil.
Back then it was a completely authoritarian system where the editor-in-chief made all the decisions. The headlines would come from the headquarters, and those of us on the ground were then tasked with going out and doing the research. No one wanted to come back saying things are different and that the headline was completely false. Those who tried it once would be gone.
Und nachdem ich dort eingedrungen war,
after my investigation, the new editor-in-chief described Bild as having a time pre-Wallraff and a time post-Wallraff, and he emphasized wanting to keep a more open mind. This really did lead to a more moderate style of reporting, but now Bild has returned to being a powerful smear sheet.
Allmächtiges Hetzblatt geworden.
There are many Germans who take issue with the paper, and with Reichelt himself. Some of them even come from within his own organisation. But those points of contention just add to the myriad challenges Bild faces as it tries to rectify its 75% drop in circulation over the past 20 years. When publisher Axel Springer founded Bild back in 1952, he intended it to be the printed answer to television. Under Reichelt, it isn't just print, it's online, it's live, and it's very soon to be television too. Bild Live has more than 500 reporters who stream news and information, sometimes for up to 14 hours straight. When news breaks, Bild Live is there, and anchors like Paul Ronsheimer have been known to flaunt their access to the powerful, sometimes reading out the text messages they get from politicians live on the air.
Ich möchte einmal vorlesen, was gerade gesagt hat.
Ist, möchte ich sagen, eine Form von Elitenverzahnung.
It reveals a kind of elitism. I find it ironic that Bild, a critic of the elite and the self-proclaimed voice of the common man, boasts about his close relationships with those very same elites. It says something about the balance and accumulation of power, and this is highly problematic from a democratic aspect.
We're very clear about not doing any excess journalism. You can talk to us, we'll not get any favors for us. It's your role, it's your duty as a politician to be in touch with us.
They would never
talk to us, to explain what you do. And it's our job to not fall for political spin and narratives, but tell people our own analysis of what our own reporters see on the streets, find out in their research and all that. So from the beginning, I felt that Bild has to be more political again and has to find its own way, a new way of telling political stories and covering politics.
This is an important political moment for Germany and for Bild. Whatever Julian Reichelt professes Bild currently is or isn't, the paper clearly wants to make a splash in this watershed election. Germany, how are you doing? That's the strapline of this election coverage. The question remains, is Bild asking Germans how they feel, or telling them?
Finally, this past week, the British government lifted almost all coronavirus restrictions in England, which, given that the UK has Europe's highest rate of new infections, is a controversial move. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has taken a lot of heat for his handling of the pandemic, including including his decision to delay lockdowns, one that scientists say undoubtedly cost lives. According to a former colleague, Johnson's dithering can be traced back to the anti-lockdown crusade in sections of the UK's right-wing press, newspapers like the Daily Telegraph, where Johnson used to work as a reporter at the tabloid The Daily Mail. Which brings us to Dale Mason. He's a fake journalist character created by an actor-comedian, Jolyon Rubinstein. Maylie is a correspondent for the fictitious Good British News. That's a play on the UK's new right-leaning channel, GB News. He went to a protest held by COVID skeptics in London. He trolled the demonstrators on their beliefs and the tabloids on their so-called journalism. See you next time.
Mummy wants a chin. Don't be surprised if you hear your child say that because they've been looking at too many of these. I don't know about you, but I'm sick of these scientists sticking a cotton bud down the throat of society and telling us how to live.
They are a bunch of nefarious, Luciferian and we're going to bring them down.
Well, there you have it. And as you're here, standing in the park with this freedom of saying whatever you want, can you feel the hand of the New World Order upon us?
Yes.
And can you still feel like the hand of the Illuminati here upon us?
Definitely, yeah.
Not here.
Not right here, but in general, there. But just not here, but over there.
Over there, definitely.
Over there.
Yeah, no tests, no masks, never wash my hands every 2 minutes, none of it.
I mean, I actually went to the toilet 5 minutes ago and I haven't washed my hands, but you don't mind, do you? We're blokes. That's what you do. Sorry, sir, can I just confirm, is it a public health emergency? Are you concerned today and are you working for George Soros?
I'm not going to be answering any questions.
So you won't speak about working for the New World Order. As you can see here, you can see more policemen, more of George Soros' army. People have had enough, and when people have had enough, we do not take it. Freedom! Freedom! Freedom!
My name's Ed Snowden. I'm 29 years old. I work for Booz Allen Hamilton as an infrastructure analyst for NSA in Hawaii.
What are some of the positions that you held previously within the intelligence community?
I've been a systems engineer, systems administrator, senior advisor for the Central Intelligence Agency, solutions consultant, and a telecommunications information systems officer.
One of the things people are going to be most interested in trying to understand who you are and what you're thinking is there can be some point in time when you cross this line of thinking about being a whistleblower to making the choice to actually become a whistleblower. Walk people through that decision-making process.
When you're in positions of privileged access, like the systems administrator for these intelligence community agencies, you're exposed to a lot more information or scale than the average employee. And because of that, you see things that may be disturbing, but over the course of a normal person's career, you only see things. When you see everything, you see them on a frequent basis, and you recognize that some of these things are actually useless. And when you talk to people about them, in a place like this where this is the normal state of business, people tend not to take them very seriously and move on from them. But over time, that awareness of wrongdoing sort of builds up, and you feel compelled to talk about it. And the more you talk about it, the more you're ignored, the more you're told it's not a problem, until eventually you realize that these things need to be determined by the public, not by somebody who's simply hired by the government.
Talk a little bit about how the American surveillance state actually functions. Does it target the actions of Americans?
NSA and the intelligence community in general is focused on getting intelligence wherever it can by any means possible. It believes on the grounds of certain self-certification that they serve the national interest. Originally, we saw that it was focused very narrowly to intelligence gathering overseas. Now, increasingly, we see that it's happening domestically. And to do that, the NSA specifically, targets the communications of everyone. It ingests them by default. It collects them in its system, and it filters them, and it analyzes them, and it measures them, and it stores them for periods of time, simply because that's the easiest, most efficient, and most valuable way to achieve these ends. So while they may be intending to target someone associated with a foreign government or someone that they suspect of terrorism, they're collecting your communications to do so. Any analyst at any time can target anyone, any selector anywhere. Where those communications will be picked up depends on the range of the sensor networks and the authorities that that analyst is empowered with. Not all analysts have the ability to target everything, but I, sitting my desk, certainly had the authorities to wiretap anyone, from you or your accountant to a federal judge to even the president if I had a personal email.
One of the extraordinary parts about this episode is that usually whistleblowers do what they do anonymously, take steps to remain anonymous for as long as they can, which they hope often is forever. You, on the other hand, have decided to do the opposite, which is to declare yourself openly as the person behind these disclosures. Why did you choose to do that?
I think that the public is owed an explanation of the motivations behind the people who make these disclosures that are outside of the democratic. When you are subverting the power of government, that's a fundamentally dangerous thing to democracy. And if you do that in secret consistently, as the government does when it wants to benefit from a secret action that it took, it'll kind of give its officials a mandate to go, hey, tell the press about this thing and that thing, so the public is on our side. But they rarely, if ever, do that when an abuse occurs. That falls to individual citizens, but they're typically maligned. It becomes a thing of these people are against the country or against the government. But I'm not. I'm no different from anybody else. I don't have special skills. I'm just another guy who sits there day to day in the office, watches what's happening, and goes, this is something that's not our place to decide. The public needs to decide whether it's appropriate. I'm willing to go on the record to defend the authenticity and say, I didn't change these. I didn't modify the story. This is the truth. This is what's happening. You should decide whether we need to be doing this.
Have you given thought to what it is that the U.S. government's response to your conduct is in terms of what they might say about you, how they might try to depict you, what they might try to do to you?
Yeah, I could be, rendered by the CIA. I could have people come after me, or any of their third-party partners. They work closely with a number of other nations, or they could pay off the triads, or any of their agents or assets. We've got a CIA station just up the road in the consulate here in Hong Kong, and I'm sure they're going to be very busy for the next week. And that's a fear I'll live under for the rest of my life, however long that happens to be. You can't come forward against the world's most powerful intelligence agencies and be completely free from risk, because they're such powerful adversaries that no one can meaningfully oppose them. If they want to get you, they'll get you in time. But at the same time, you have to make a determination about what it is that's important to you. And if living unfreely but comfortably is something you're willing to accept, and I think many of us are, it's the human nature. You can get up every day, you can go to work, you can collect your large paycheck for relatively little work against the public interest, and go to sleep at night after watching your shows. But if you realize that that's the world that you helped create, and it's going to get worse with the next generation and the next generation who extend the capabilities of this sort of architecture of oppression, you realize that you might be willing to accept any risk, and it doesn't matter what the outcome is, so long as the public gets to make their own decisions about how that's applied.
Why should people care about surveillance?
Because even if you're not doing anything wrong, you're being watched and recorded, and the storage capability of these systems increases every year consistently by orders of magnitude, to where it's getting to the point you don't have to have done anything wrong. You simply have to eventually fall under suspicion from somebody, even by a wrong call, and then they can use the system to go back in time and scrutinize every decision you've ever made, every friend you've ever discussed something with, and attack you on that basis to sort of derive suspicion from an innocent life and paint anyone in the context of a wrongdoing.
We are currently sitting in a room in Hong Kong, which is where we are because you travel here. Talk a little bit about why it is that you came here, and specifically, they will speculate that what you really intend to do is to defect to the country that many see as the #1 rival of the United States, which is China, and that what you're really doing is essentially seeking to aid an enemy of the United States with which you to seek asylum. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So there's a couple assertions in those arguments that are sort of embedded in the questioning of the choice of Hong Kong. The first is that China isn't an enemy of the United States. It's not. I mean, there are conflicts between the United States government and the Chinese PRC government, but the peoples inherently, we don't care. We trade with each other freely. We're not out in the war. We're not in armed conflict, and we're not trying to be the largest trading partners out there for each other. Additionally, Hong Kong has a strong tradition of free speech. People think, oh, China, great firewall. Mainland China does have significant restrictions on free speech, but the people of Hong Kong have a long tradition of protesting in the streets, of making their views known. The internet is not filtered here, no more so than any other Western government. And I believe that the Hong Kong government is actually independent in relation to a lot of other leading Western governments.
If your motive had been to harm the United States and help its enemies, or if your motive had been personal material gain, were there things that you could have done with these documents to advance those goals that you didn't end up doing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, anybody in the positions of access with the technical capabilities that I had could, suck out secrets, pass them on the open market to Russia. They always have an open door, as we do. I had access to, the full rosters of everyone working at the NSA, the entire intelligence community, and undercover assets all around the world, the locations of every station we have, what their missions are, and so forth. If I had just wanted to harm the U.S., that you could shut down the surveillance system in an afternoon. But that's not my intention, and I think for anyone making that argument, they need to think, if they were in my position, and you live a privileged life, you're living in Hawaii in paradise and making a ton of money, what would it take to make you leave everything behind? The greatest fear that I have regarding the outcome for America of these disclosures is that nothing will change. People will see in the media all of these disclosures. They'll know lengths that the government is going to grant themselves powers unilaterally to create greater control over American society and global society. But they won't be willing to take the risks necessary to stand up and fight to change things, to force their representatives to actually take a stand in their interests. And the months ahead, the years ahead, it's only going to get worse until eventually there will be a time where policies will change, because the only thing that restricts the activities of the surveillance state are policy. Even our agreements with other sovereign governments, we consider that to be a stipulation of policy rather than a stipulation of law. And because of that, a new leader will be elected. They'll flip the switch, say that because of the crisis, because of the dangers that we face in the world, some new and unpredicted threat, we need more authority, we need more power, and there will be nothing that people can do at that point to oppose it, and it'll be turnkey tyranny.
I'm Jamil Jaffer. I'm a lawyer for the ACLU, and I'm up here with Bill Binney, Alex Abdo, and Jim Bamford, who I will introduce more fully in just a second. I'm not sure how many of you got a chance to hear Keith Alexander yesterday, the head of the NSA, talk about the NSA's activities. I wasn't there myself, but I have heard that he offered a few reassurances. One of them, apparently, was that the NSA is not, in fact, keeping a file on every American. I'm just reporting, all right? The second reassurance he offered is that when the NSA incidentally or inadvertently collects information about Americans, it's required by law to minimize that information, meaning it's required by law to delete it or to redact it. And the third thing he said is that the NSA's activities, and I think this is in some ways the most reassuring thing, the NSA's activities are fully consistent with the Constitution and with the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which is the statute that governs the NSA's activities inside the United States. So the question I want to ask is, why is it that the head of the NSA feels obliged to offer those kinds of reassurances right now? I think there are a few reasons. One reason is that the NSA just has much, much more power today than it has ever before. That's because of technological advances. It's also because of social behavior. We just share a lot more information electronically than we have in the past. And it's also, and this is perhaps less known, because the law is so much weaker now than it was even 10 years ago. Over the last decade, the laws that govern the NSA's activities have been weakened repeatedly in 2001, in 2005, in 2008. And as a result, the NSA really operates without a leash right now. The people that I'm up here with today are perhaps the best people in the country to explain precisely what that means. One of them is Bill Binney, who was with the NSA for more than 30 years. He left the NSA in October of 2001. When he was at the NSA, he was working on the very issues that we'll be talking about today. Alex Abdo, next to him, is a colleague of mine at the ACLU. He's a staff attorney. He works on surveillance issues, especially in the national security context, including a case that's before the Supreme Court right now involving a challenge to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And then Jim Bamford, who many of you already know, is the nation's leading expert on the NSA. He's written many books about it, many articles about it. Among his books are The Puzzle Palace, The Shadow Factory, and Body of Secrets. So with that brief introduction, let me ask Jim first. Putting aside the legal issues, putting aside the legal restraints on the NSA, what is it that the NSA can do right now? What is it that the NSA is technologically capable of doing? And how is that different from what the NSA was technologically capable of doing, say, 10 years ago?
First, I just want to say I'm really happy to be here. And I was here 10 years ago, and it's really grown. DEFCON's really grown since then, so I'm really happy to see that. The other thing is General Alexander asked me to fill in a few blanks that he left when he was speaking here, and I said I'd be very happy to do that since I've been talking about NSA since he was a private, I think. And don't be fooled by that black t-shirt he was wearing. Underneath it is a giant parabolic microphone. So, what can NSA do today that it couldn't do 10 years ago? Well, first of all, pre-9/11, NSA was following the law to a large degree, basically since the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act was passed back around 1978. But that all changed after 9/11, and that's when George Bush decided to do the warrantless eavesdropping. So since then, NSA has had an enormous building boom like nothing in its history. Billions and billions of dollars of new buildings, new infrastructure, new listening posts. Built a new listening post or some of these are reconstruction of existing listening posts, but a giant listening post, actually the largest in the world, in Atlanta, outside of Augusta, Georgia. It'll have 4,000 positions, 4,000 eavesdropping positions. And another one in Texas, and then there's a downlink in Colorado for NSA's satellite information, and then another one in Hawaii. But the high point of NSA's building boom is a building I just wrote about in the April issue of Wired Magazine. It was a cover story in Wired Magazine on NSA's enormous data center in Utah, Bluffdale, Utah. Ironically, the only other thing in Bluffdale, Utah is the second largest polygamy sect in the United States. So you got both groups there listening for messages from the heavens. So it'd be interesting to watch these two groups socialize together. But NSA is building this huge data center now in Utah that'll be 1 million square feet and cost $2 billion, so they can store. It'll be the central place for storage for virtually all the information that they collect. It's basically going to be their cloud, so that all the listening posts, all the analytical positions, the headquarters and so forth will be able to go in and come out, take stuff in, post stuff out, analyze it from their distant locations. And the other thing is this huge supercomputer center they're building down in down in Tennessee, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, the place, Secret City, where they worked on the atomic bomb in World War II, and now they're working on basically the computer equivalent of the atomic bomb. Computer that is into the petaflops in terms of speed now, and they're building another building down there now that will be able to get into the exaflops, which I've got a statistic here I'll read later on how fast that really is, but it's very fast, and then maybe on to yotaflops or whatever. So that's pretty much where NSA is right now. It's this enormous building boom. They've got enormous storage capacity for all the new communications they're going to be intercepting, and a new supercomputer center for attacking encryption, maybe even public key encryption or other kinds of encryption, although it's hard to say exactly what they're going to be using that center down in Tennessee for right now.
So Bill, how do you reconcile, is there some way to reconcile General Alexander's statement that the NSA isn't keeping track of every American with the existence of a facility like the one in Utah?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say, first of all, that the statement about not keeping track of every American is absolutely true. He missed a few. Not many, but he missed a few. Okay? But that's the kind of word game they play. I've been in that business for a long time, so I knew their word game. But no, there's absolutely no excuse for him even implying that he's not collecting all this data. I mean, it's not just for processing after linear recursives or things like that. It's actually storing information that they're collecting, which is emails, FTPs, those kinds of things, Twitter things, and all kinds of data about everybody. And what they're doing then with that is, of course, indexing it in a B+ tree kind of index, where they take attributes where that describes the communicants involved or it labels you, and then you build social networks for everybody out of that by doing indexing with B+ trees. And there's virtually no limit that I know of that you can do in indexing that way. You can do trillions of relationships and still be able to manage it. On a very large scale, including interrogating into that base to make decisions against flowing data that you're looking at, like terabytes of data flowing by. But the problem is, unless you know what to do to begin with, you can't tell the program how to execute the rules or what to make decisions to make at every step along the way. And that's really where they have a problem. It is in the ability to automate analysis of large data sets and large sets of information to make decisions as that data is passing by, or to go into large bases that they've stored, like they will be storing in Utah, but they have other storage facilities too. I mean, Utah could probably store I did some calculations on it. I didn't include this in the EFF article or the affidavit that I signed earlier, but if you looked at it, even if you take the current capabilities that's being advertised online at cleversafe.com, They have 10 exabytes of storage that they can put into 21 racks of equipment that occupies 200 square feet of space. Well, if you take the 100,000 square feet they're going to have at Bluffdale and divide it by 200 and then multiply that by 10, you get 5,000 exabytes that they can store there. Well, I mean, that's, if you had 100 years of communications of everybody stored there, to maintain 100 years, that is replacing every year, you're collecting a year falls off the end, you keep the latest 100 years online in Bluffdale, it would take 1,250 NARIS devices to do that. Now that's, a NARIS device will do 10 gigabits a second, which means it could process and produce output and give you a display of, say, 1.25 million 1,000 character emails a second. So it will take 1,250 of them running full time, all the time, to keep that last 100 years online. So that's an awful lot of processing just to fill that one storage site. That is not the only storage site they have, by the way. They have a lot of others that's just planned to take the overflow that's coming out the next year or so. So up till then, I see him saying things that are verbally or by the word are correct, but he's missing the basic, the reason I left NSA was because they started spying on everybody in the country. That's the reason I left. NSA's charter, and it was a legitimate one, was to do foreign intelligence, and I was with that all the way, and I did the best I could in that job. Unfortunately, they took those programs that I built and turned them on you, and I'm sorry for that. I didn't intend that, but they did that.
So, Alex, is this a problem with the law? Is the problem that the law is not sufficiently restrictive, or is the problem that the NSA is violating the law?
I think it's quite clearly both. After 9/11, we saw excesses of the Bush administration that we never would have guessed would happen. We saw the executive simply ignoring statutes, engaging in warrantless surveillance. And for the centuries before that, the key protection of the Constitution was that when the government wants to surveil Americans, it do so with judicial approval after making its case to a court. And that was abandoned by the Bush administration. But that was just one instance of extreme violation of the law. But then Congress essentially codified that in 2008 when it authorized the government to engage in domestic dragnet surveillance of Americans' international communications. And so what we have now is an institutionalization of the lawbreaking that occurred after 9/11, with the result being that the key legal protection that has protected us since the enactment of the Bill of Rights is no longer in place with respect to our communications. So we can't be sure, that the law is protecting us. We can be quite sure, actually, that it's not protecting us. But even putting aside what happened after 9/11, with the violations that are now well known and exposed, there have been countless others that we don't know about. We know we have hints and suggestions from documents that we've gotten through FOIA, through leaks to the press, through the great work of Jim, and through what we've learned from Bill and a few of his other colleagues at the NSA who defected. We know that there have been other violations, but what you didn't hear in General Alexander's speech is any explanation of those, any provision of the transparency that is so sorely needed. We have those hints in the documents, and when we have even a new one coming out of Congress just a week ago about the NSA violating the Constitution in its use of its latest surveillance authority, but we don't know in what ways exactly. We don't know how often, and we don't know with what effect.
If you're a lawyer and you work on these kinds of issues, the difficult thing here is you've got this set of laws, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act principally, that lay out what seem like pretty clear restrictions on what the NSA can do. For example, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act says that in most instances when the NSA wants to essentially wiretap somebody inside the country, they need to get something called foreign intelligence probable cause, some version of probable cause. But what you guys are describing, Jim and Bill, and what is described in a lot of newspaper articles that have come out over the last few years, is something that seems wholly inconsistent with those restrictions. And I'm trying to figure out, is that just because the NSA doesn't care at all about the law, or is it because the NSA can manipulate laws that are poorly understood by the public? Is it that they're playing word games? Is it some combination of all of these things? Because what you're describing really is hard to reconcile with the laws as the laws are generally understood by the lawyers who work with them.
Well, one, I think I'm noticing, looking at a lot of documents I've gotten from the Freedom of Information Act and so forth and writing about NSA. I mean, there's several sets of laws. There's the FISA Act, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and there's the FISA Amendments Act. But then there's another thing. That's just the congressional, that's the statute. Then there's an implementing, set of implementing instructions, and they're known as USID 18, United States Signals Intelligence Directive 18, which is top secret with about a dozen code words after it. And that sets out different, for example, sets out different definitions from what most people are familiar with. Most people are familiar with the Webster's definition of intercept. So speaking of General Alexander speaking about intercept, you have your own impression of what that word means from your history and from reading dictionaries definition, but the USID 18 has a different definition, and that's an intercept doesn't take place until it's actually listened to, until somebody puts on some earphones or actually reads some text on a screen. So you can pull in all the communications you want, store it in a media, and store it for as long as you want in Bluffdale, for example, in Utah. So there's these definitional differences between what civilians talk about and what NSA talks about, and then there's different sets of laws and regulations, and most of which are top secret. So that's sort of this mist that you have to look through, this fog you have to look through when you're dealing with the legal issues with NSA.
Well, as far as I could see, the real plan here was to spy on Americans, because it didn't start in October of 2001. It actually started before that, in February, when certain people like 3-star generals from NSA went around asking different telecoms to provide them customer data. That happened in February of 2001. So that to me implied the plan was to spy on Americans from the beginning. Because at that point, that was 3 months after, they were doing that 3 months after we had put our system together, where it worked all the way to the end, and you could manage graphing huge numbers of things, trillions of things. So once we had shown that we were connected all the way, 3 months later they went around asking for this data to spy on every American. So that to me seemed to be the intent from the beginning. But I mean, they didn't openly say that. Okay. But they were going around asking for the data to make that happen. And then 9/11 came along, and that was a good excuse to execute. Okay. At that point, the execution started. So, and there is another real problem. Unfortunately, the software will, once it takes in data, it will build profiles on everybody in that data. And if you want that profile, you can simply call it up by the attributes of anyone you want. So in other words, the process does so much analysis already, and it's in place for people to look at if they want to do it. But what they're trying to do now is they realize they have too much data, so they have to automate that process too. So that's what the big data initiative is really all about. Out of the White House, the recent initiative is to try to get automated processes to go through that, because they can't hire enough people to do it. There's just too much data, okay? So that's not possible. So they've got to get an automated process doing that. And this to me was the intent from the beginning, and to do that inside this country. It was obvious from what they're doing, the sequence that they were doing, that that was the case. And the law, they didn't pay any attention to.
So just to channel General Alexander again, you know, the law requires the government to minimize data about Americans once it's acquired it. So why isn't that a sufficient protection? Why shouldn't we be reassured by General Alexander's statement that minimization requirements protect Americans from precisely what you're complaining about now?
Because all the oversight is totally dependent on what NSA tells them. They have no way of knowing what they're really doing unless they're told. So, plus I would add a simple little point. We put in protection for U.S. citizens by doing unique anonymization that we would encrypt attributes of the U.S. citizens so you couldn't tell who you were looking at, even if you had it in your base. So, but you have to ask yourself, how could I do that from the deep? How could I do that with the databases they have, unless it's already there, in clear, so I could encrypt it?
Alex, I know that one of the complaints you have sometimes made about the existing FISA is the weakness of the minimization requirement.
Yes.
Say a little bit about that.
Sure. The legal problem with the minimization requirement is just that it has a gaping hole which swallows the rule, which is that if the information is essentially what the NSA wants anyway, if it pertains to foreign intelligence, which is defined extremely broadly, then the NSA doesn't have to get rid of that information. They can continue to keep it in their database. But we've learned something else actually quite interesting in the past few weeks from a few senators who've been very vocal in their objections to reauthorizing the latest surveillance statute at the end of the year, which is that even supposing they have information in their database that they're not supposed to or not supposed to target from the outset, they can then keep it in their database and target after the fact by going back and conducting data mining searches afterwards, in other words, to get the information that they couldn't target from the outset. And it sounds like a minor loophole, but it's one that a few senators think is the key to the entire program. That the NSA isn't concerned so much with using its authorities to target foreigners, but that they're using it as an excuse to accumulate massive amounts of information that they can then later search. Under the legal theory that Jim laid out, that the search doesn't happen until they run the query later on. If it's not, the acquisition isn't the search, the querying later on. And of course, what's troubling about all this, aside from what's obvious, is that the secrecy that pervades this program makes it impossible to know whether any of these speculations are true. We obviously have the experience of Bill and Jim to flesh out these theories. But so little is really known about how the NSA actually interprets its statute, how it interprets its authority, and how it's using those authorities.
One thing is in terms of the internal controls, there's really two. One is the General Counsel's office, and the other is the Inspector General's office. And just to give you an example of how effective those organizations are, during the period of the warrantless eavesdropping, during the Bush period, when it was decided that we were going to go into warrantless eavesdropping, when it was decided by the administration that the NSA was going to do warrantless eavesdropping, they refused to allow the General Counsel's office or the Inspector General's office to look at the legal justification for doing this. Even though at one point, a couple times, NSA said, we'd like to see what the legal authority is for us doing this. The Bush Justice Department said, you're not cleared to know the reasons that you have to do this. And General Hayden at the time just saluted smartly and turned on the bugs. So, you have to really wonder what the usefulnesses of some of these internal organizations are. Somebody from the higher up in the administration could just say, it's none of your business and you're not cleared to know.
Why do they want to do it?
Why do they want to do it? Why do they want to surveil? That's their job. That's what they do. That's what they were born to do, and that's what they like doing. That's their job. They surveil. Eavesdropping is what they're charged to do, and you don't see very many people, except for Bill. There were only Bill or a couple other people associated with Bill that actually said, "Wait a minute, I'm not going to do this. I'm opting out." it's time for me to look at the agency from the outside in. So basically, whatever people at NSA are told to do, they do. So you have that period during the warrantless eavesdropping where, now not everybody at NSA knew that they were involved in warrantless eavesdropping. I should make that clear. That was a very compartmented program. But after it was revealed, there were very few people that objected and left the agency. So NSA's job is eavesdropping. Their original charter is eavesdropping on foreign countries and foreign people in foreign countries, which there's no legal problem with because they don't have any constitutional protections. The problem is when NSA is told to eavesdrop domestically, and this wasn't the first time. Nixon, during his time, told NSA to start eavesdropping domestically, and it did it for about a week. And NSA was very happy. They were overjoyed that they were being given that opportunity to eavesdrop domestically on anti-war protesters. And it only stopped because this big civil libertarian named J. Edgar Hoover came in and said, I'm going to blow the whistle if NSA keeps doing this. He told that to Nixon, primarily because he saw NSA as stepping on FBI's turf. Yep. And so a week later, Nixon canceled the program. But there's a willingness at NSA, there was a willingness then, there was a willingness during the Bush administration to sleuth smartly and say, turn on the microphones when they're ordered to do that by senior officials in the administration.
I just want to say something about the distinction between targeting people inside the United States and targeting people outside, because it's true that there is this sort of obvious distinction between those two categories of surveillance. But one of the things that's going on now is that the NSA is it's engaged in dragnet surveillance of people outside the country. And they say that they can do this because those people outside the country don't have constitutional rights to assert. The problem is, from a constitutional perspective, the problem is that when they are surveilling those people outside the country, often those people outside the country are communicating with people inside the country. And so the NSA is sweeping up these huge volumes of communications between Americans inside the United States and non-Americans outside the United States. And those huge volumes of communications are going into these databases, including these Utah databases. And the problem that Alex was alluding to, that Senator Wyden has been harping on for the last few weeks, is that once all the information has been collected on the theory that it was collected in the course of surveillance of people abroad who don't have constitutional rights, all of that information sits in a database here and then can be searched even if the NSA is concerned not about some foreigner living abroad, but about some American living here. And from, there are lots of reasons to be worried about NSA surveillance even of non-Americans living abroad, but even if your only concern is about NSA surveillance of Americans inside the United States, this is, as Alex says, a really huge loophole in the legal protections.
One other point also is that when you're thinking of targeting overseas and not targeting U.S. citizens, it sounds fairly innocent, but one thing you can target, for example, would be the overseas data or call centers. All these call centers they have in India and Philippines and different places now. All these companies from AT&T to American Express, Bank of America, all these companies are outsourcing their when people call up and want to know what their balance is in their banking account, for example, it might be answered by a calling center in India. Well, you can target the calling center in India because it's a center outside the United States. It's foreigners that run it outside the United States, and you're not specifically targeting any American within that call center. But everything going in, if I call up and say, what's the balance of my banking account, or a question about some financing that I'm doing, that's picked up and would also go to Bluffdale because it's not being specifically targeted against me, but it's being targeted against an overseas call center. So that's sort of a loophole.
So I want to ask the question that we started to talk about a minute ago, but ask it more directly. So why aren't more, if this kind of thing is going on at the NSA, why aren't more people speaking out about it?
Well, I think the point is they're all been pretty much scared by what they did to us. They threatened us with prosecution. They tried to prosecute Tom Drake, and they basically made our lives a mess. They made us incapable of getting business. But that kind of thing is the power that they have. They can harass you in many different ways. And so they tried doing that with us. And they advertised that, by the way, internally in NSA on the internet inside the NSA. They put our 60 Minutes take on their video internally, and they made it clear what they were doing to us internally. So the whole idea was to scare the entire population internally. And that's really what's happening with our government, the way I see it. Ronald Reagan said we're a country with a government. I think we're reversing that relationship. Our country is now thinking our government now thinks it has a country. And the only way to maintain it But see, the only way to really maintain that is to do like all these other totalitarian states have done around the world. You have to gather information about your population so you can control it. And that's really what's driving all of this. They're afraid of the population of the United States. They want a country, this country. That's really, in my view, what they're doing and why. So, I have this. All right.
I want to save a little time for questions, but I have at least one more question. This one for you, Alex. I mentioned at the beginning that there's a case before the Supreme Court this fall. What's at stake in that case?
So this is the ACLU's lawsuit on behalf of a number of human rights groups, journalists, activists, challenging the latest surveillance statute, the statute in 2008 that really shifted the paradigm from individualized surveillance to dragnet surveillance. And unfortunately, for the past 4 years, we haven't been litigating in court about whether the law is constitutional or not. We've been litigating about whether our plaintiffs have standing to challenge the law, whether they can file the lawsuit to begin with. And what's discouraging about the suit is that the government's argument all along has been our plaintiffs can't sue because they can't prove that they were surveilled. But of course, we, the NSA, would never disclose whether anyone in particular is surveilled. And the consequences of that argument should be obvious. They're that no one can challenge the law. So even if you're not concerned about the extent of the NSA's authorities, you should, I think, perhaps be concerned that not even the government wants there to be constitutional review of these laws. They don't want anyone in court discussing them, let alone in public or in Congress. They don't want courts reviewing these laws to establish meaningful limits if there are limits to establish, or even to say if the government is correct and the laws are constitutional, which they're not. So that's what's at stake in this lawsuit, is whether this statute can be challenged. But it's not just this statute. There are numerous surveillance authorities that not only the NSA has, but other agencies use on a daily basis to intercept our communications or to gather intelligence. And if this suit is turned away by the Supreme Court, then I worry that there'll be little opportunity to flesh out the constitutionality or the limits of the law in this area. And without those limits, we know what happens. And if not for a few intrepid whistleblowers, we wouldn't know about what happened after 9/11. That wasn't the success of the rule of law in this country. That wasn't the result of a lawsuit that brought that about. That was luck. And we can't rely on that forever. We're a system of checks and balances for a reason, but those checks and balances are not working in this area.
Just one point also, I was actually one of the plaintiffs, along with Christopher Hitchens and a few other people, of the original suit brought by ACLU. we were among the people that was identified as not being able to show that we have standing. We weren't able to show that we were physically eavesdropped on because NSA doesn't tell you who it eavesdrops on, so they threw our case out. And that's what this case is going forward with now, which I'm very happy about. The problem with the case, however, is that even if the case is successful in the Supreme Court, the government has this ultimate way to turn the switch and end the case. It's called the State Secrets Act, which is used a number of times against cases where it looks like it's either going to lose or it may end up exposing government secrets. And that's one of the problems you have here, is that even if the courts accept the argument and find in favor of the ACLU, the problem is that at some point, the government may flip the switch, turn the off switch off, and use its ultimate weapon, which is the State Secrets Act.
Yeah, this is maybe worth underscoring. The secrecy surrounding all of this surveillance obviously prevents us from knowing the full extent to which the government is spying on Americans. We don't know in what instances and what context they are getting location information, for example. We don't know in what context specifically they are getting content information from emails, and we don't know in what context they get purely domestic telephone calls. So all of this is shrouded in secrecy, but perhaps even more troubling than that is that the secrecy insulates all of these surveillance powers from judicial oversight. So you've got all of these statutes that look like laws in the sense that they are enacted by Congress and nominally subject to constitutional limits, but it's literally, or has been literally, impossible to enforce those constitutional limits because the government has all of these procedural objections that have in many cases been successful. One of them is standing, the one that Alex was talking about, and another is state secrets, the one that Jim was talking about. So if you have...
By the way, I mentioned State Secrets Act. That was a mistake. It's not an act. It's called the State Secrets Privilege because there's never been anything enacted allowing them to do it. They just do it and get away with it. So they don't have any basis in law for that privilege.
If you have questions, just come up to the mic up here.
It's Kim Sutter with Wired. I have a question about Alexander's statement yesterday, if you can clarify. He said that, when talking about the minimization, he said that minimization which means nobody else can see it unless there's a crime that's been committed. That to me sounds like we're not talking about national security. What's the legal basis for that?
So the question was, does minimization mean that the NSA can't look at the communications unless there's evidence of a crime? And that's simply not true. That's not what the requirement is. You can go and read it if you want. Come up, I'll send you the link to it later. The requirement, that's one of the problems with the Dragnet surveillance in 2008, is that it doesn't have to be tied to wrongdoing. It just has to be tied to foreign intelligence, which can mean a lot of things. It can mean a human rights advocate talking to an embassy abroad. It can mean anything relating to the foreign affairs.
But is there a legal basis for collecting data under national security reasons and then seeing criminal activity in it for use domestic prosecution? Is there a legal, what's the legal basis for that? Because that's what it sounds like he's talking about here. It doesn't sound like he's talking about national security.
I think what he's saying is that once we've collected something for foreign intelligence reasons, we can use it to prosecute people for crimes, and that's certainly true. But it's also true that they don't have to minimize information that falls into this very broad category of foreign intelligence information. And so whatever protections apply to, whatever minimization protections apply, those protections don't apply to this very broad category of information about foreign affairs, about the economy, about national security, about terrorism. And if you're a human rights researcher, for example, in the United States, and you're talking to the victim of some human rights abuse abroad, then you can't be assured that your communication isn't being listened to by the NSA. The law gives the NSA the authority to listen to that communication. And if General Alexander said something different yesterday, I think he misspoke.
It's awfully generous of you, Jamil. My question is for Bill and Jim, but anybody else can address it if you so desire. I'm often struck by how little anyone in Congress, really, besides Ron Wyden, is willing to challenge any of this. There's almost near, silence or agreement with the government's arguments about state secrets and wiretapping, and the FISA Amendments Act passed in 2008. Obama voted for it. So my question is, we talk a lot about surveillance in this world. We don't talk very much about blackmail, and I don't really get why, because it seems to me that, there are 535 people in the House and the Senate who could affect some change in this regard, right? Ostensibly they have power over the NSA, and they don't. And I'm wondering if there's any, if there's anything about blackmail, frankly, that, people are actually afraid to do the right thing because they too have emails and cell phones and, personal lives that are potentially, stuff that they don't want public. So, thanks.
Let me take that. I think there's a couple of factors involved here. One is that NSA produces an awful lot of intelligence for the U.S. government on a very large scale. Most of it is coming from NSA. In fact, for all of the government. So they look at them as a source of input of intelligence on decisions they may have to make. So they look at them as a valuable resource. But NSA also looks at Congress as a way of getting money, and they really they focus in on preparing stories, which I would refer to as techno babble. They go down and bamboozle Congress, and the Congress can't challenge them because they don't know any better. Okay, you have congressional people down there who don't know not necessarily, some of them don't even know what an email, some of them still don't email, so they aren't technically swift, okay? So these guys go down there and bamboozle them. And you can see some of that in that testimony that happens in the various committees there. You can see that. So they get bamboozled that way. But also, from the congressional perspective, they look at NSA as all these different buildings they're putting around the country are going into somebody's area, right? And so there's money going there, and that means that they're supporting their constituents, and therefore they feel they have to support them, and so they let them do basically what whatever they want to do. They say it's okay because they're our intelligence resource in the government. So those are the kind of factors I think that are involved in that.
Well, I agree with the person who asked the question. It's changed a great deal from the beginning back in the mid-'70s when you had the first House and Senate Intelligence Committees. You had Frank Church, who was very much going after NSA. He had the first real hearings that, for the first time, exposed what NSA was doing, and it had been spying illegally for 30 years at that point, until Frank Church and his committee found out about it. That's what created the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And that was at the beginning. Now you have the opposite. At the beginning they were watchdogs, and now they're lapdogs. All they do is salute smartly and do whatever the intelligence community wants. Actually, they're gone beyond that now, where they actually suggest to the intelligence community that they should be doing more and so forth. And I think one of the reasons for that is that, especially post 9/11, it's this whole idea in Congress that your opponent the next time up is going to say you're weak on terrorism, you're weak on defense, you're weak on U.S. security if you vote against anything that NSA wants or really that the Pentagon wants. So you've got that factor that the Congress is very much afraid of constituent reaction if they look hostile to anything that's has the word terrorism in it.
But there would be more Ron Wydens if the civil liberties constituency were louder. If more people wore Sue the Bastards t-shirts.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Cory Doctorow, and I write about this stuff a lot. And the question that occurred to me when you were speaking earlier is the one that someone shouted there from the audience, why? And the answer you gave made it sound like there's someone sort of there's an upper echelon at the NSA who eavesdrop on people the way ants build hills. And it's just sort of a compulsion, like if they weren't doing this, they'd be hand washing or something. And then it sounded like you said maybe, no, the reason that they're doing this is that it's just a way of building an empire, and if they could build an empire by pasteurizing milk, they'd be out there pasteurizing milk instead of listening to people's conversation. None of those sound like a totally complete account of what their internal theory is of what happens when you harvest the entire communications corpus of a nation or a planet. Is it merely compulsion? Is it merely empire building? Do they have a theory about what they're going to get? And as a kind of end to that, as a Canadian who lives in the United Kingdom, can someone explain to me why eavesdropping on me is okay, but not okay for Americans, and maybe explain how that relates to the answer to why people harvest all this communication on Americans? Thank you.
Yeah. First of all, there are treaties and with different between countries that we don't spy on each other's people. So that does. Those do exist. So I know it's hard to believe, but right now I don't think any of that really applies. They're taking in everything without minimization. They don't minimize anything, as far as I know. Everything's being taken in, and part of it's a fear. I think that they're afraid of not having the data, so they couldn't figure something out. Or if they pull all the data in, eventually they'll figure something out and be able to go back and resolve the issues in retrospect. So I think there's several drivers there. But my real point is this is much larger. It has to do with a government that's virtually implanted in Washington. People don't get, this is why I'm for term limits, right? These people don't rotate, so they stick down there and they think they know better, okay? And so now that's why I said I think we have a government that thinks it has a country.
But it seems conceivable to me that with the right analytical tools, it's true that if you collect more information, you're more likely to find something. But it's true in the same way that it's true that if you searched everybody's home inside the United States, you would find more than you do right now. But ultimately, there are trade-offs that we make. We make decisions about the limits we want to place on government power because we want to be not just safe but also free. And ultimately, this question of would we be safer or will we know more if they collect more information? I think it's an interesting and useful question. I think people should ask that question, but it doesn't answer the ultimate question, which is, do we want those policies? And to answer that question, it's not susceptible to an empirical study. It's you have to make value judgments, for the same reasons that we don't think it makes sense for the government to search everybody's home without a warrant, we don't think it makes sense for them to collect everybody's communications without a warrant.
I would like to add just one thing there. Technically, that is for all the programs that we had and everything we ever did, there was absolutely no reason to collect all U.S. citizens' communications at all. We could have determined all of the bad guys inside and outside this country without doing any of that. And we could have done it legitimately, legally, in conformance with FISA, the Constitution, and everything. But they chose to go down the dark side.
Well, unfortunately, we're getting kicked out of this room. But we have we have a Q&A room. It's called Track 2 Q&A, and we'll be there for at least a few minutes right after this. Sorry, John. Thanks for coming.
Mr. Obsidian. Prepare yourself for the Man of Black.